Okay, so I put my cake on my cake board, and like I said, this cake board was actually made for a 9-inch, not a, this is an 8-inch. I had a moment. Anyways, this is an 8-inch. This is actually for a 9-inch cake pan, so of course more was showing. If it had been if it's the actual right size, if you see that right there, that's about 1/4 of an inch. It was just a little bit bigger, and that's all you want. It's like 1/4 of an inch bigger than your actual cake. Now my cake is completely cooled, and I'm doing a crumb coat. With this, I would have normally put wax paper underneath the cake and the cake board and the cake, so that way that cake board would have stayed clean. I don't think I have wax paper today, so that means I've got to be really, really neat. If I get it on the cake board, I'll just wipe it off. I'm not going to fuss about it. But if you're doing, you actually, and I think there's a picture on my thing of that too, where I put the wax paper underneath the cake when I did the crumb coat. And what you're trying to do is seal the crumbs into your cake, so that way you don't see crumbs in your icing. So you put a very thin layer on. So I have normally you want to use an offset spatula, but I picked this up at Dollar Tree and it worked, and I did all my wedding cakes that way. But see, can y'all see the crumbs in that? I'm not going to continue using that. I scraped it. I actually, when I did my actual wedding cake, what I did was see, and it's going to have crumbs in it. And that was the hardest thing that I had, that I just had so many issues. It was supposed to lock your crumbs in, so that way when you did the rest of your cake, you wouldn't have crumbs in it. And I fought and fought with the icing, and I kept scraping my icing because I kept getting crumbs in it. And I'd go across it and go, oh, there's more crumbs. And I used an extra bowl just to wipe off the extra icing, because I had the hardest time with the crumb coat. And then once I got my crumb coat on, which is what I'm doing now, it's supposed to be a thin layer, but I'm going a little bit thicker today because I don't want crumbs. And I'm sure I could probably layer this and get the same effect. And I'm gonna say something else too. When you're icing the cake, you might want to put it up on a pedestal, like a pedestal cake plate, which is what I'm going to do, so that way it lifts it up, because I can't really see that side. So let me put it up a little bit, and that'll make it easier for me to see. Okay, now I have it up on a pedestal. And I'm going to, my cake was much thicker than this, because I ended up using, this is just one cake box. I ended up using, like, if you go on Wilton's Pinterest site, it will tell you how much cake mix that you need for the size cake pan that you're using. That came in really, really handy, which I don't think that's going to crumb, so I'm not going to worry about that right now. We're just going to do this. Then I'm going to stick this in the refrigerator, and I'm going to let it harden, and that's supposed to seal the crumbs. And then the icing that I just put in there that's got crumbs all in it, I will not be using that. Because if I do, it's just going to re-put crumbs in my icing. And when it's white, especially white icing. When you have chocolate icing, it's not that big of a deal, but when it's white icing, you can see the little brown specks of crumbs. So you want to, what I keep putting layers till I don't see it. But we're going to do the crumb coat. I'm going to stick it in the fridge. And then we'll go from there. Now I've let the crumb coat sit in the refrigerator. And I'm going to take some of the icing. And I'm going to put a big glob of it in the center. And you're just going to kind of go back and forth. Keep checking your spatula to make sure there's no crumbs in it. And this is to kind of seal the two cakes together. And if you need a little bit more icing, then feel free to grab some more. Because the icing is pretty inexpensive to make. So if you needed to make more, you know, that's why I'm not too worried about it. I'm seeing a couple of crumbs, so I'm going to scrape in my crumb bowl and my crumb cup just to get those crumbs off of it. Now there's no crumbs. And I would say that's a, oops, kind of holding it. That's kind of a good coat to stick the two cakes with. Okay, so now I'm going to take my other cake. I'm going to put that on top. And then I'm going to do a crumb coat on this. Let the whole thing sit in the refrigerator. And then we will ice the cake completely. I've decided to do the sides before I go and put it in the refrigerator. I'm not very good at doing sides of cakes. I don't know about y'all. But this icing just works like you wouldn't believe. It's just better than your canned frosting. But it's very thick. And see, even though I have a space in between my cakes, it's just, it's so thick that it's filling up those holes for me. And I'm not messing up my cake board too bad, so, because the icing is so thick. When I actually did my wedding cakes, I actually used a Lazy Susan on top of this. That's why I wasn't used to it sliding, because it doesn't, so I'm kind of holding it with my finger. But I had a Lazy Susan underneath my cake board, so that way I could turn it as I was putting the icing on. That does come in handy as well. And I'm not worried about smoothing right now. I'm worried about covering the cake and making sure it's no holes in it. That's all I'm doing. This is not about, and I do really thick layers, because like I said, it's just, I do it really thick, so that way it makes it easier. See, I got, so I put a pretty thick layer on. Now I'm going to stick it back in the fridge. Now that I've done my sides. And I shouldn't have a problem with crumbs. We shall see. Okay, this has been sitting in the refrigerator for about 30 minutes. And I'm going to do it that way to start out with. You want a big glob of icing on the top of your cake to start out with. And if it comes off of the top and goes down the sides, don't worry about it. Just make it easier to... So you want a big glob of it. And you kind of want to go back and forth like this. And spread it out like in that motion. You want to start out kind of thick, so that way to go around it. So that way you know that you're not going to get crumbs in your cake. They'll be all down in the bottom. Make sure y'all. And then that way you know you won't get any crumbs. And that's kind of what I did. I kept building layers and got it thicker and thicker and thicker till I got it where I needed it to be. We're not worried about at this point of getting it pretty. We're just trying to get the icing on it. And this is pretty simple. It's a rocking back and forth motion. And I am seeing crumbs. I don't know if y'all can see that right there. But that was just one little single crumb by itself. I'm not seeing crumbs anywhere else, so I have enough icing on it to where I can kind of fix my mistakes. Now my frosting is still kind of at room temperature, so now I don't have no great way to come down the sides. Oops. I'm going to go through and make sure I don't have any cake showing anywhere. If I do, I'm going to make sure I put a gob of icing on it. So when I go to smooth it out, I just don't want to see the cake underneath it. And there's many ways that you can decorate the cake. If you're good with a piping bag, you could pipe a design. You could do all kinds of things. I'm not good with piping. I piped a little bit on the top of my cake, but my daughter did it. She you have to keep constant pressure on it. I do know that much, and I just could not keep constant pressure on it for some reason. I had a really hard time with it. Couple of tips I'm going to give you about the cake. Make your cakes in advance and put them in the freezer. Your icing will keep up to, I think it's 3 weeks. 3 weeks to a month, your icing will stay fresh. Just put it in a plastic container. Okay, I'm not seeing any cake anywhere. I think I have covered it rather well. So I'm not seeing any cake at all. And that's your main objective. You don't want to see that cake. And you keep gobbing the icing on until you don't see it anymore. And right now, I mean, if you had the wax paper underneath it, Okay, I think we're pretty good. So, you want to clean your spatula off. And if you want a smooth cake, you want to come across it like so, scraping off the excess onto your, back into your bowl. Now, if my cake was flat, which my cake is not completely flat, but that's okay, because you can make it look straight with your icing if you really take the time to do it. My cakes, when I did them for my wedding, were pretty flat. So you want to do the top first, because you see all this extra icing on the bottom. You're going to kind of go at an angle, and you're going to hold. Are y'all in? Okay, make sure y'all can see. My spatula is at a diagonal. I'm using the cake board as a guide to go around, and I am spinning it around. This is when you need a Lazy Susan. But my cake pedestal seems to be moving pretty quickly, or moving pretty easy on this counter. I'm not having issues with it. If you have a lot of icing, just scrape it back into your bowl. That's why you're going to use a lot of extra icing, because a lot of icing is going to come off. Now, that's still not completely perfect. I'm going to take a cup of really hot water, and this is what's going to make it smooth. I'm going to give you a couple of ideas on what to do at this point once you get the icing on. I'm going to take a cup, and I'm going to fill it up with some really hot water. And I have pretty hot tap water. And you want to put your spatula in it, and you want it to set. And there's other tools that you can use. I had a girlfriend of mine that had this, she had a purple square looking thing that was flat on one end, and it was beveled like that on one end, where you could make zigzags into your cake. And I'm sure you could buy that stuff at Michael's, but she makes cakes and stuff, and she was like, here, this might help, and it did help. But you see how you have, let's move this over here and let it warm up for a minute. Do you see how I'm getting the little, all that in my cake? That's what I want to remove. I want it to be flat all the way across. And so by doing that, you heat up your spatula and you get it warm. And it's pretty warm. So I'm going to knock off some of the water. And you're going to go across it just ever so lightly till you get those little things off. Now this takes time. This takes time to do. You'll even notice a glycerin. Now you cannot do this with the icing that you've gotten from the store. I always wondered why I could not do this with icings at the store. Well, that's why. You just get it warm. And like I said, my icing's at room temperature. And then you just go across it. And if your spatula is big enough, you can go across the whole cake in one shot. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that at this point. Now I'm going to do the sides. You're going to do the same thing with your sides. You're going to keep putting that spatula in that warm water. Like I said, my warm water is pretty hot, but can y'all see that? That's me sliding the cake off. But you just go across it, and it just smooths out that icing. At the bottom, I really didn't care because I ended up putting fake flowers underneath the bottom right here, which you'll probably see in the picture, which was an idea of another my sister-in-law. That was a really good idea of hers, to put flowers underneath it. But you just keep going across it and you smooth out all those edges. Take time. If you took time, you could really do it, but I'm not going to do it for the sake of time. Another thing you could do, you can't get your icing straight for whatever reason. You're having a really difficult time. This is another thing you can do. Take the spatula, no piping required, and just go across your spatula like this. And pull that icing up. And it gives it more of like a rough texture. Then that way you ain't got to worry about it being smooth. So that's one way you could do it. Is give it a little bit of a rough texture. You could also, and you could do the same thing on the sides and give it a rough texture all the way across. Something else you could do is once you initially put it on, you know, if you don't want to take the time to make it straight, you can take your finger and go across it like this. I have done this with cake box icing, and it just kind of gives it a little bit of texture. And you could do the same thing on the sides. You know, just lightly go over it, and it gives you a texture. And it's not like you really messed it up. But I really do like the fact of this one. It doesn't matter if it's not completely flat. You know, it doesn't matter if it's completely straight. You just go across it, and it picks that icing up and gives you little peaks. And then voila. I mean, I made it straight. You definitely can do that. The warm water with the spatula. You could even put your icing in the refrigerator. Let it get super, super cold. And then that process will work even better. But that's how I got it straight. And then on the edges, my edges didn't quite look like I wanted them to. So we piped some icing around the top of the cake and the bottom of the cake. And the bottom of the cake ended up getting messed up because my sister-in-law turned around and put fake flowers underneath them. And that's how you hide that bottom edge. Doesn't matter if it looks good or not. And if you're piping it, you can pipe it. So like right here, I don't know if y'all can see that or not, but I have a gap. Oh, I almost dropped my cake. That's okay, because I have more icing. Oops-a-daisy. Well, let's try it again. You see right there? It's got a gap. You can use piping in a bag to keep it from so people can't see that. It's a simple way to do it. Okay, guys. Now I got to get my fingers out of the cake. Okay, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Have a great day. Bye.